come along and look at it, and it's just, go to the supermarket and do your own shopping. Just so that it's kind of like a treasure hunt, keeps them on the toes, and makes the day a little more interesting. This way.
Yeah, I know.
Hello.
Try to like make sure.
How does this next? It just goes around like.
Hola, buenas tardes.
Hi, good afternoon, and welcome to the new press conference of the films that this year forms part of the official section in competition. This film is it's a new film by Laura Carrera on Falling, and her first feature film. I'm going to introduce the people, part of the people that are there with us today for the film. On the other extent, Mario Patrocinio, who's the producer of the film. JOANA Santos, the leading actress, Laura Carrera, director, and producer Jack Thomas O'Brien. If you deem, let's open up the questions, and if not, I will ask a question. Does anyone want to ask a question? Well, to start and open fire, I would like to ask Laura about the origin of the film, because when we see the film, are you listening to the translation? Yes? One feels when one sees a film, we're seeing a film that people, there's a feeling that's almost autobiographical in the film. So therefore I'd like to ask you to what extent that such is the case.
Yeah, I think it's a combination, but it definitely comes from the first years of living in Scotland as a migrant. I think it's a very specific feeling, and at the time it felt like it was important to tell. It also coincided with the same time that I got my first job. So I moved to Scotland when I was 18, got my first job, and I think that entire experience was quite shocking. And then I think I looked, at the future, and it seemed a little scarier, I think, than it had up until that point. So that feeling was definitely the influence. But then also I did a lot of interviews with pickers, so people who do the same job that Aurora does. And those conversations influenced the film a lot. And it kind of, I think, a lot of the details that I ended up writing in the script came from those conversations, for sure. Yeah. Thank you.
¿Hay alguna pregunta?
Any further questions? Yes, there's a question here.
I actually live in Edinburgh, and I'm quite interested in the fact that this is a very anonymous kind of view of Scotland. It's quite unusual to see that on film, actually. Nearly always directors go in for, showing the monument in Edinburgh or whatever. I mean, I know part of it looked as though it was shot in Princes Street Gardens, but you would only know that if you live there like I do. And I just wondered about that, keeping the whole thing anonymous and, having various Scottish accents as well that are across the piece, because it was obviously a deliberate choice.
Yeah, I mean, it felt important because I think I noticed how diverse Scotland was. In terms of the city, I think it has to do with the character. I think this is a character that lives so much between the flat and the warehouse that it almost felt important to feel her disconnection with the city. So the only time that we see her in the city is when she goes for her job interview, one of the kind of key moments where we actually gather a little bit more information about Edinburgh. And I think it was to have that sense of separation from the other world, for sure. Yeah.
Si hay alguna pregunta.
Any further questions? I think that one of the strong points of the film, or one of the reasons why we were interested in the selection committee, and this is a question that perhaps everyone could answer, it's because of the balance between showing a reality without judging it, and in turn without being compassionate towards the leading actress, the maintaining that balance of not judging her for whatever she does, neither her nor the rest of the characters, and not to feel there's an empathy towards her, not feel compassionate for her. That is to say, it addresses very serious things like precariousness in this capitalist society that drags everything along with it, and for example, and even the mental illness perhaps also there is insinuated, but there's no compassive sort of look towards her like good social cinema. And I would like to ask you about this issue. How did you work upon this from the script or from each of your different jobs? And this is extended to the leading actress as well, okay?
I think for me it was really important that we didn't lose the sense of kindness around her. And you're right, I think sometimes films can be overly dark, but they blame what is happening around the character and the characters that, are around her. And that to me was really important not to do. Because I think, you can experience the full force of capitalism and have people around you and they will help you, but that might not be enough. And that to me was really important. Even with the flatmates, there are people that they're there for as much as they can, and the colleagues the same, but actually the way they are living doesn't really provide enough time for them to get to know each other and to care for each other. And I think a lot of the problems stem from that. But yeah, I had a real sense of, I don't want Aurora to have anyone that she can point the finger at and say, it's them. Even managers, which I think is quite an easy, they're an easy target. But, even managers, they are doing their job. And that was something from a lot of the interviews I did, people would say that over and over again. It's kind of not their fault. There was almost that compassion even for the people around them, in the job. So yeah, for sure, yeah.
Bueno, yo quería preguntarle
I'd like to ask Joanna about how did you address this, approach this character that we know from two fields, from the routine work she does on the day-to-day of going to ticketing and picking, obviously, as a picker of all of the different articles on the shelves, and then the issue with their colleagues, with her flatmates and her colleagues. But it's a character addressed or approached from a moment of silence, from a woman who's trying to find her place in the world. How did you prepare your character, and how did you work upon it? What I like very much is the body work, shall we say, apart from the text and the dialogues, this way of the leading actress to sort of fit into that warehouse and to feel uncomfortable in her own skin, so to speak. And I would like to talk about how you worked on this on your own and also with a director to be able to understand the character.
Eu soube em agosto que ia fazer esta personagem.
In August, I knew I was going to portray this character, and as of there, I started to try and absorb the dialogues better, the text, and then at the beginning of October, I went to Scotland for 2 months, and that's where I really started to go further in depth into my character, because myself, I started to live on my own in an apartment in Scotland, and in this case, I was able to absorb that silence which was necessary for this character. And this allowed me to do the same things that the characters did, come home, just like the character does. And I did the same steps that Aurora takes, for example. I think in any case, I'm a bit more extroverted than her. We're completely different, by the way. And then after that, we went through rehearsals with Laura and with the rest of the actors, and this helped us enormously to find the way Aurora talked or spoke. For example, Aurora's English wasn't perfect. It couldn't be perfect, obviously, and that's how we had to find a certain empathy with the rest of the characters. I'm not too sure whether anyone else wants to ask a question. Hi, Marcela from the Diario Vasco, a local newspaper. I like that the people from the south, like the Spanish person who was screaming in the kitchen there, Aurora, who's from Portugal, people from the south are much more warm, shall we say, or very hot, but a lot is very cold. So for the Polish people were more animated, so to speak, or livelier. What about the cultural side of things and the stereotypes that you try to portray?
I don't know if I agree, but I don't know if I thought of, I guess, there was a lot of people, I guess from that time as well, when I was living the first years in Edinburgh, that I met a lot of characters that then I thought, I think, there'll be things that end up in a film that I make. But, they influence, for example, Vera as well. Like I had a colleague in my first job that kept saying that she wanted a job in an office because she wanted to sit. And she kept repeating it over and over. And that then ended up in the dialogue in the film. But yeah, I don't know if I was entirely aware that we had shifted the stereotypes in terms of the nationalities.
Sorry, can't hear the question from the audience. No, you feel that there aren't any stereotypes. That's what you meant. Okay.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's good. I think it's because, when you meet a lot of people from different nationalities, you realize that, yeah, everyone is different, really, and your background doesn't really define you, and, you can present very differently, yeah.
Can I add something? It was really interesting piecing together quite a large cast, many of whom only appear once in the film, from a huge amount of different nationalities, all of whom basically came from Edinburgh and Glasgow. And it was interesting in the prep process as we were casting, seeing how they would all fit together, whether they were in the warehouse or in the flat, and the diversity of different cultures or ethnicities, or I feel like we did a good job of balancing those things, and it's representative of those places. So in a way, the stereotyping wasn't thought about too much. It just sort of happened naturally. Those characters come from that place, and that's how they are. So.
Yeah, and even in the work with the characters, I think, especially during rehearsals, we allowed for a lot of, changes in the script at points that if, the text that I had written for a character didn't seem right, the actors or the non-professional actor that was playing it would be given the freedom to adapt, according, using words that maybe they would use, etc. So I think that might have also helped with that.
¿Hay alguna otra pregunta?
Another question? No. Well, there's a conversation from the journalistic side of things and criticism, and there's, as of late, an important part of the movies that are made. It's a cinema which is very thesis type. Everything is told like in the first person. Everything is verbalized and everything is explained. And Unfalling takes a contrary approach, I believe. And as you said before, we address very deep issues, but we give the spectator or the audience the possibility to draw their own conclusions. So therefore, this talks about a very precise and accurate and beautiful script or screenplay to tell everything from a minimalist sort of approach. But this is a great effort from the directing point of view. Do you agree with what I've said, that this cinema is a bit sequestered by the subject matter and by the explanation, by trying to explanation, and the characters who usually talk a lot? And I think that Unfalling, it goes against the current in this sense, really. And that's one of the great virtues, I believe, of the film.
Obrigada. I think it was a little bit the process of writing. At points, I think we doubted. It's my first film, so I had no way of proving that this was going to work on the script, other than going and filming and seeing if it did work. And I think at points there was a doubt if people would understand even some of the themes, or if it would just feel like we're just seeing her work and we're seeing her doing her day to day, and we're not really entirely in her head. And I think a lot comes from also JOANA's performance, because I think, she says so much without me having to have written it. But yeah, I really like this sort of cinema where you're discovering and you're allowed to exist within the film as well, and you're allowed to think through. And that to me was definitely important. But I guess there's a balance, because at the end of the day, I knew I was making a film that was going to be someone, that was very defined by work, and that was, looking for purpose and definition through that. So in a way, I knew I wanted to explore that. And I also wanted to, look at the financial vulnerability that she's experiencing. But I do think it was through the writing and through all the research that all these different themes started popping up. And I think at that point I realized, okay, this isn't just going to be a film about, how bad the job is or how easy someone can, struggle financially with just one unexpected bill. I think this film can be more existential than that, because I think it is about, what the human cost to living this way is. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm not sure whether there are any questions. Yes, there's one in the front row. Hi, Alba from Contra Cultural. As a millennial, I feel very reflected. The film moves me enormously. Congratulations. What drew my attention very much was this way of trying to structurally deal with these issues, which is the hyper-capitalism that exists, how workers are affected, are treated, for example. And for example, the smartphone, I think it appears quite often in the film. I think, the smartphone, which appears quite a lot. Can you tell us about that?
Observing and looking around and seeing everyone on their phones. So that felt important. And I think for Aurora, it becomes a sort of, it's kind of her best friend, really. It's the thing that represents also all these worlds that she could be part of and that, are right there, but she really isn't. And it's quite poppy and flashy. So we worked a lot on sound design to make that connection with what she's looking at the phone. And at the same time, there's that paradox of the phone is also something that is actually more and more making you socially more kind of, struggling to connect with other people. So it kind of works as this tool that is a support, but at the same time, it also causes issues with then connecting with others around. And it's not just her. I think a lot of people in the film, we were I think whenever we were in rehearsals, we were grab your phone. Whenever you don't know what you want to say or do, hold on to your phone, because it's kind of what we do, I think, with our days. Yeah.
Gracias. Hay una pregunta aquí.
Yes, there's another question here. Yes, my question is an extension for what my colleague says. I think I would like you to talk about the ending, the last sequence, whether I personally thanked you very much. I'm very grateful because it sheds some light on the whole film. I said, God, she's going to end up in the park, lying down, and something's going to happen to her. And I want to know whether that sequence was also always in the script. How did you work upon this? And that light that you use at the end, how did you work upon this? Thank you.
So I found it really hard to write the ending for the film. And it's because I knew I didn't want it to remove hope from the film, but I also didn't want to be, unrealistic. She would go back to work until she could find a way out of there. But that felt quite dark, and I didn't want it to end there. And I struggled. I wrote several different endings. It went on for a while. And I kept thinking, no, there must be something, because I really, I do truly believe that, there is hope, but it's very hard to get it into a scene. And around that time, a lot of the pickers I was speaking to within this week started getting in touch, and they were like, oh, this incredible thing happened. There were some outages in our warehouses, and for the first time, we actually got to know our colleagues. We played games. Someone told me I found out the name for the first time of one of the colleagues, and they talked about how humanizing that moment had been. And, we're talking about, a morning where, there was an outage and they couldn't work. And I thought that could be it, because it's temporary, but it just shows the glimpse of, what could be if we stop working and, the possibilities of what could be created from there. And that excites me a lot. So I wanted to, leave the film with that sort of, glimpse of what could be.
No sé si hay alguna pregunta.
Not too sure whether there are any further questions. If there aren't, I will ask you, Laura, about directing issues. On Falling has the virtue that everything is so realistic that it seems that the camera is not even there, and it seems that everything flows very naturally. But if you observe it with all of us that are here today, that we're used to watching movies, we see that it's a film extremely well directed, from a planning standpoint, from where do we place the camera at each time, how to choreograph the characters in each scene. I would like to talk to you at a directing level, where it was always clear in your mind that this is the way you want to tell the story, and also extend this if the rest of you want to participate, the producers, that is to say. Any references, it refers to the good British social cinema, like the first films by Ken Loach, for example. And I'd like to ask you, what's your school, what's your background there, and where did you address the directing aspects? And was it clear in your mind that that was the way you get the path you were going to take?
Yeah, I think even from the moment I was writing the script, I knew that I had this feeling that feeling lonely has a very particular sensorial experience. And I think is more heightened. It's like, you feel your loneliness a lot harder than maybe other people are perceiving it. And it felt like a camera was such a great device to do that, because I think it added this element of feeling observed. And then obviously for the character of Aurora, there's also the money issue that she's trying to conceal. So we tried to work with the camera in a way that would allow us to kind of have these glimpses into what her financial situation is as well, for example, because she doesn't ask for help. So the only way to really try and communicate what she was going through was really through the camera. And then we made some choices, like so Aurora, usually the walls behind Aurora are closer to her, so there's less depth behind her, and I think it talks of that sense of like claustrophobia. And the other characters, they have slightly more space, and I think it talks of that sense of, perspective. The camera is filming what it feels like the perspective of the character. And then, of course, the Carl Curtin, our DOP, when we both met, we loved the cinema of the Dardennes and Ken Loach, and so their camera work really kind of influenced our shorts, and I think it sort of influenced the way we worked since. And it was also a practical side. There was also a practical side to our choices because of our limited days. We don't have endless days to shoot it. What allows us was, to have usually one shot, and we try and get that shot, especially the shots where it's just Aurora. We try and, do takes of that shot until we get it. And that means we don't do a lot of coverage, but we have to be really secure that that shot is the one we have. Like even LA, our editor, would sometimes be a bit like, oh, you didn't do coverage here, did you? And I was a bit like, okay, maybe I was a little hardcore there. Maybe next time.
I would like to add to that, where myself and all the exec producers on the film, the British exec producers, were quite terrified by Laura's confidence that she could get entire scenes in a single setup. But she absolutely did, consistently. Even though we'd go to 30 takes, she was like, this is what we're doing. And she was so confident, and it was incredible to watch. Because, from day one, there was a strong sense of a visual identity to the film, a technical approach that everyone felt confident about from the beginning, yeah.
No sé si alguien quiere...
Not too sure whether anyone else wants to ask a question. And for all of you to participate in the conversation, I'd like to ask Mario and Jack. Laura, it's an opera prima. It's her first feature film, but she comes from very powerful and very prize-winning short films. It's a debut, but it's a feature film debut, but she was already an author that was well known. And in the festival circuit, she was very respected. And when she came, On Falling came along, we thought we'd have to listen and watch to what she had made, but it's a reality which is much more difficult to make films, to produce films like On Falling. That's my feeling, as the industry stands at the present moment. Beyond the certainty that Laura, you could only get a good, really interesting film from Laura. But what was there about this project? Because it's so difficult to make personal type films and specific commissionings of these types of films with a certain mystery. What made you decide to wager in favor of making this film and forming part of the production?
I mean, I'd say in a way it wasn't that difficult. It felt almost, Mario actually was working with Laura for a little bit before I came across her, and there was already a really strong draft of the script when I first read it. But it felt like a perfect fit for what we were doing at 16 Films. You know, we make Ken Loach's films, we make political films. We're looking for new directors who want to make their films in their own way, but have a strong identity. And I read Laura's script, and it was just beautiful. And then the process began, and obviously developing and then raising the money takes a while. But we had great support from, well, Bro Cinema and the ICA Fund in Portugal, but BBC Films and the BFI and Screen Scotland. I would also add, you know, it's a co-production. It's an international co-production, which massively helped bring the whole thing together, because the first piece of money was Portugal. The second piece of money was Scotland, and that's a regional fund. And, you know, it's ridiculous that we're not in the European Union anymore, but we can still do that. And that's a great thing that people often forget. So yeah, I mean, I'd say that.
Thank you.
I'm going to answer in Portuguese. So the first time we... I'm sorry. Primeira vez que entramos em contato com o trabalho da Laura.
The first time we got in contact with Laura's work was with her first short film. And when we talked to Laura to see whether she had did a feature film project or she'd done anything on a feature film, all of a sudden this project emerged. And I think that it's always important to think that it's necessary to wager in favor of making these projects and directors. Projects are done slowly but surely. They're gradually developed step by step until we to have all the conditions in order for this to be made. But I think such was the case from the outset. We realized, we were sure that Laura was writing what she wanted to make, and the way in which she developed everything later on. The script was impressive for us when we read it. It showed a lot of maturity. It showed a lot of will of wanting to do something, and that it would make us reflect. I think this was, and it was a perfect situation, I believe, that occurred during the pandemic and allowed us to reflect upon a series of issues and of the lives of each and every one of us. And Laura wrote something that touched her very close from the society we live in, but from another perspective. And so therefore, this association between the UK and Portugal and the talent that mixes and blends so many nationalities and brings them together, I think it's a great example of what should be done more so in world cinema. I would like to finish the press conference, and as regards when Jack was talking about production as a production that was committed with political films, I would like to ask you whether in a certain way, for we who are in the program and film critics and in festivals, the political side of films, and to project that, this is something we look for, because in the complicated moment we're in, it seems that we're pursuing this. We feel that cinema, to a certain extent, not always, but it has to be a bit of a testimony of a period and what's going on in that period or that time. You, from the other side of things, when making films, do you have that feeling as well, that we're at a time that commitment continues to be greater than what it was in the past, or simply, as we've interiorized it, it comes out spontaneously when we write a script, like when we decide to produce a film? So therefore, I would like to ask you how you position yourself vis-a-vis what I've just said, that commitment from cinema, especially because it's a film, is social cinema. Could you talk a bit about this, please?
I think to me, it always felt like it came naturally. Because I think to a degree, all films are political. It just depends if they're aware of, what they're saying or not. I think if you choose to portray characters and you don't really show them at work, that's a political choice. And so, when you choose to create a portrait of the world that we live in, I think there's a responsibility in that. And I think that's a responsibility that I take seriously. And I think there's a lot of there's a lot of films out there that did that, and you know, and then there's also a lot of films that avoid going into it. But you know, that is also a political choice on them. Yeah.
Thank you. Bueno, no sé si queréis añadir.
Not too sure whether you wanted anything. Would you like to add anything?
Só uma coisa que eu acho que é importante.
Yes.
Concordo com o que a Laura
I
disse.
think something which is important, I agree with what Laura has just said, but I think that the lack of us understanding that what being human is humanity, and it's above everything else, that it's an issue of that we have to situate ourselves politically, but we're, first of all, we're human, so any film that makes us reflect upon our humanity, whether we're taking the right or wrong road, that's important. Nevertheless, I think that these types of situations bring about political positioning, but also especially to reflect upon of mankind or humanity and where we're at and which way we want to go, to try to create a cinema that opens doors so that we can manage to reflect and bring about changes to our own society.
Pues muchísimas gracias.
So thank you very much to all of you, for all of the people representing Unfolding. Good luck with your film, and we'll see you. I'm sure we'll see each other again. Thank you very much.